And by the way, if you're wondering what's the benefit of being the beneficiary of a blind trust, what perks and advantages that there are, alright, here's some perks and advantages. Ultimately, being the trustee, there are certain information that, unless I request it, does not get freely offered to me. Like, for example, the amount in the trust. Well, simultaneously, the amount that's supposed to be in the trust and the amount in the trust is supposed to match up. Alright? Even if I don't have the overall number of the amount in the trust, does not mean that the money is not there. It just means that I don't know the number of the amount in there. Ultimately, the trust is supposed to be used for me, while at the same time, not allowed to price gouge, not allowed to go ahead and ask for loans, not allowed to go ahead and assume, a fiduciary role, or at the same time attempt to try to coerce power of attorney. All right, because understand the stipulation when it comes to the attempt of coercing power of attorney, negating access to the person that was supposed to be, the distributor of the trust, ultimately ends up getting negated. All right. So ultimately, if you're gotcha trying to prove somebody ended up going ahead and, committing a financial crime, make sure that you understand the guidelines of said specific trust. Because understand the precautions that not telling the trustee the amount in that trust is. And that's actually a preventative measure. So that way, if anyone attempts to go ahead and kidnap the trustee and tries to torture and coerce the amount in said trust from them, ultimately, because they don't have the number, they can't give the kidnapper what they don't know. All right? Now, ultimately, you're probably wondering, how is that a deterrent? Well, if you kill the trustee, ultimately it's already established as far as motive and intent. At that point, it makes the deductive process a hell of a lot easier to law enforcement. Because motive and intent, money. But now the question, when it comes down to it, how can you act like, you know, classist shaming is going to go ahead and convince the person to give you what you want, you know? Well, you're trying to make a gotcha moment, because would know the amount in there if was able to go ahead and see. And the funny part is, when it comes to fiduciary duty, it is the person that with the power of attorney that's supposed to be the distributor of the trust that ultimately, at the snap of my fingers, has to go ahead and present exactly what needs to be shown, and the factor of the legitimate solvency, as well as, no predatory debt incurrence in an attempt to defraud me. All right? So, understand there are certain perks in that situation and everything. And ultimately, just, even if a parent ends up going ahead and being the controller of said trust, does not mean like they're allowed to use it as their own personal piggy bank, because they're not. Ultimately, understand there are laws put in place that parents that go ahead and predatorily do that will get prosecuted, and ultimately the person that's the beneficiary of the trustee, or the beneficiary of the trust, they do not get a deciding vote on if the person gets prosecuted or not. At that point, they're literally just the victim that got defrauded. If charges end up getting picked up, that's the state's decision as well as the federal government's, especially when you try making, predatory practices and attempt to defraud them of years worth of wages. Like, for example, setting up a predatory payday scheme, like, say, for example, going ahead and trying to scam somebody out of their social security number, getting loans in their name, going ahead and trying to use a lookalike to, go and have conversations with bank tellers to go and try to set plausible deniability, you know, basically trying to go ahead and set up a 3-card Monty situation. It's, yeah, you lack tact. So, now my question is, with those details being in the forefront, do you understand how fruitless of an endeavor trying to kidnap and torture somebody for information that they couldn't present to you because being the recipient of the blind trust, part of the condition was not knowing the overall amount in said trust, while simultaneously not being able to go ahead and parrot the amount in said trust, because ultimately not being privileged to the amount of the trust, the value of the trust as a whole, as well as the distribution, while simultaneously the person that is in charge of the distribution of the trust, if they're caught skimming off the top, that is not a light prison sentence. That is a hefty prison sentence. And remember, ultimately, the victims are the ones who are defrauded. So I do not want to have to go ahead and put my name on that check. That would be a check that my ass would not be able to cash. And let me tell you, that bounce is gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt bad. Especially because anyone caught skimming off the top of said trust is responsible for repayment of 100% of the value of the debt, but adjusted for inflation as well as an annual yield percentage. So, annual percentage yield. All right, so that means the amount that the interest ends up going ahead and adjusted for inflation, adjusting to the amount saved by the money just being in the bank. So, and ultimately, if you've been skimming off the top for a long time, like even, for example, creating a fictitious job that doesn't exist in an attempt to get yourself put on the payroll, to try to intercept somebody's financial flow, which considered tortious interference, you're on the hook for 100% of the money borrowed, not forgiven. It's not a grant, it's a loan. Who ends up being the determining, variable if it's a loan or not? Not the recipient of the trust, and ultimately the amount that could end up going ahead and having to be paid in restitutions because of doing that. Understand, the damages, they still get calculated regardless. Whether prosecution happens, no choice in the matter. Wanting to go ahead and reach out to me for clemency or leniency and everything, I could sympathize, being in a position that's completely out of your control. But what I could do about it, that is still yet to be explained to me.